Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, so we just left off, hopefully, in all classes right around this slide, right? We were talking about the story, the rise, the prominence of your guy, Julius Caesar. Yeah, exactly, right? So the guy is very, very important. And right where we left off in class, we were basically, in most classes, talking about how Pompey, the guy that actually was a part of his first triumvirate and tried to help him take over, or not help him take over anything, but help him get elected consul and then send him out to Gaul. And then, of course, Caesar crosses the Rubicon, threatens Pompey, war. Pompey ends up missing his noggin, has it sent back to Caesar in a basket, right? There's also an element of the story we discussed where Caesar ends up going to Egypt. He meets Cleopatra, right? He actually ends up, apparently having a child with Cleopatra and, a lot of other stuff. But one thing we do know is that in this entire process, Caesar was elected dictator multiple times, right? Multiple different times. He was elected dictator during the Civil War against Pompey, and then he resigned and gave the power back. And then he was elected consul again, and then he was elected dictator for 10 years, which was a really, really big deal. And all this time, during these moments, he was a very strong leader. He created more jobs for people. He expanded citizenship to a bunch of the conquered people, basically making it so the plebeians and the growing plebeian class was getting to the point where it was going to overwhelm that of the patrician class, right? So basically, in a nutshell, Caesar was a fantastic leader that was giving more wealth, more jobs, and more opportunities to plebeian people, right? And even making more plebes by making more people citizens. And in the entire process, the Senate absolutely feels like this. They are mind blown by the fact that Caesar is expanding all of these different things to other people and threatening their power, right? The other thing that they're afraid of is the fact that Caesar is growing so prominent that they are afraid that the plebes are going to want him to be basically their king, right? And if you have a king or a monarchy, that would eliminate the power of the Senate, right? If you had a dictator that was there forever, you would eliminate the power of the Senate. So the Senate feels very threatened. One moment that kind of describes this whole process is one of Caesar's lieutenants, Marc Antony, right? So actually, apparently, at the triumph of Caesar over the Egyptians, tried to hand Caesar a golden crown, right? A golden laurel crown that if he would have put on his head, it would have been symbolizing the idea that he is now king of Rome, right? But as everybody watched him and listened to him and wanted to see what happened, apparently Caesar took the crown and threw it down and said that Jupiter is the only king of the Romans, which is their god Zeus, right? Their version of Zeus. So basically, he's like, no king for me, that he is only here to support the people. So in this process, though, men, particularly senators, begin to conspire to murder him as they are losing power. The senators are realizing that as long as Caesar is alive, we will be suppressed in our power, and our gains will not be what we need them to be, and that we will possibly be basically clipped out of all of Roman history completely if we do not do something about this, right? So ironically enough, a bunch of guys got together to try and assassinate the man that was literally just helping other people. And then a very, very big moment happened. Michaela Schmidt, there you go. Got it. All right. So classic Caesar dressing, gets stabbed in the back. What happens is, in 44 BC, Caesar was elected dictator for life, right? So in 44 BC, Julius Caesar was elected dictator for life by a small group of senators and as well as a huge number of plebeians, right? And Caesar, since this process happened, was basically going to live out the rest of his days as the ruler of Rome. And so the senators were like, this is the last straw. And several of them got together, 17 of them got together, and they jumped Caesar as he was on his way to a meeting of the Senate at this place called the Theater of Pompey, right? So Pompey apparently had this theater built long before he died, after he made a bunch of money, and had a giant naked statue of himself built there. And it was a big Roman theater where you could go see a show. Well, the senators never met in the same place all the time. They would meet wherever they could find space. And so they were going to meet at the Theater of Pompey that day, and Caesar got stabbed to death 23 times down at the feet of a statue of Pompey looking down at him, right? Absolutely crazy moment in history. Apparently, Caesar pulled out a stylus, like a pen, and started stabbing at the other senators' feet and stuff like that, trying to fight back, and may have covered his face, and just so they couldn't see him die, and may have also yelled out, "Why all this violence?" Right? So apparently. But what ends up happening, though, is that this moment in history becomes known as the Ides of March, and it is considered to be one of the most seminal turning points in Western civilization's history, because Ides means middle and March meaning the month of March, so this occurred actually in the middle of the month of March. Now, throughout the entirety of Caesar's reign, he did a lot of really intense stuff. He fixed the Roman calendar and he created it like it is now. He renamed the month he was born to July. He redid Roman time tracking. He fixed the dating system. He created new public works, and he did all these positive things for the people of Rome that still impact us now. Literally, the month of July is named after Julius Caesar. Literally, the year system that we use is actually because of him. The leap year was brought in under Julius Caesar's reign. All of these things were done under his reign that affect us every single day. And ironically, all these rich guys were like, no, not today, and they stabbed him to death, right? And two of the dudes that ended up leading the whole thing have very important names that you need to write down, okay? Brutus, B-R-U-T-U-S, and Cassius, C-A-S-S-I-U-S. Don't get him confused with Crassus. But they're the two guys that led the conspiracy to have Caesar assassinated, right? And of course, it's even referenced in Aladdin whenever the genie is like trying to create like the recipe for a prince, whatever. In this moment, he goes, "Et tu, Brute?" And like apparently an arm comes out and basically it's like dressed like Caesar about to be stabbed, right? So yeah, take that, Kelsey. Fix you all done. Now, anyway, big thing though is the empire period is going to begin after the death of Caesar. Now, you'll notice the date says 29 BC, and then Caesar was stabbed in 44 BC, so you're like, come on, Mr. Terry, 15 years went by before this started. Well, a lot of stuff happened between those different time periods, right? And it all has to do with this guy, right? This guy is going to rise to power, and who this man is Caesar's adopted son, but mainly his grandnephew, right? So one of his sisters gave birth to this man, or like down the line or whatever. He's related to Caesar by blood, but he's his nephew, right? And this guy's name is Octavian Caesar, right? So what ends up happening during this moment is that the senators, like Brutus and Cassius, were expecting that the people of Rome were going to be excited that they had killed this man because he was making himself a king. But what ended up happening is a riot broke out in Rome and a small civil war started raging of pro-Caesar people and anti-Caesar senators creating armies and fighting against each other, right? So what ends up going down, though, is this dude, his name is Octavian, apparently in Caesar's will before he died, was adopted as Julius Caesar's son. Now, a lot of this is believed to be the fact that since Julius Caesar was elected dictator for life, he would have maybe wanted to establish some type of hereditary rule. Hereditary meaning that he needed a son to take over the throne after he died, but since he didn't have one, he adopted his grandnephew, Octavian. And again, Octavian is very dope, and he looks like this, right? So Octavian is a very intense figure in history, and he becomes the first emperor of Rome, right? Octavian would be adopted by Gaius Julius Caesar, and he becomes like his son, right? So in this entire process, though, following the death of Julius Caesar, Octavian returns to Rome during one of these crazy civil wars, right? During this civil war, Octavian comes back into Rome. He is called in by the senators because they're thinking to himself, oh, we'll send Octavian out, who is his grandnephew, who we think we can convince to fight for us to go and destroy Caesar's armies, right? Caesar's armies are being led by a very important person, Marc Antony, right? Marc Antony is leading the pro-Caesar army, and they are actually up in northern Italy camped out, right? So the Senate believes that Octavian will help them win this war because of their distant relationship and also because they think Octavian is a pushover, right? They actually believe that Octavian was going to just do whatever the senators said because he wanted money or power or whatever, and so the Senate brings him in, and they're like, go fight Marc Antony and beat your adopted dad's army and then restore power to the Senate, right? Well, what ends up happening is Octavian marches up there and goes up against Marc Antony, and after a small battle, Octavian decides, wait a minute, is it a smart idea for me to try and destroy my father, my adopted father's right-hand man? Maybe I should listen to what he has to say. So after a small battle that was pretty inconclusive, Octavian and Marc Antony got together and met one another and discussed some things with each other, and they decided, rather than fight each other, they should both assemble their armies together and march back on Rome and take the fight straight to the senators, right? Take it to the senators that killed Gaius Julius Caesar and dethrone their power and take back over, right? And this entire time, Brutus and Cassius are still alive, and they're living out in Greece in exile, right? So Octavian and Marc Antony march on Rome and take it over using a hit list, right? Because a big thing that you got to remember is Caesar always was running out of money and had a tremendous amount of debt. So Octavian wanted to create a system to where he could raise a bunch of money to pay off his uncle's debts, or excuse me, his adopted dad's debts, pay all that stuff off, and also use it as a way to make money for himself. So him and Mark Antony actually created a list of names and put bounties on them, and they were all senator families that would have conspired to kill Julius Caesar. See what I'm talking about here? Krista was right in class. Julius Caesar was smart, but his nephew / adopted son, Octavian, might have been even a little bit smarter sometimes, right? Octavian was like, oh, what we'll do is we'll give away like 300 talents for every time you kill one of these families. But where will their property, their money, and all of their bank accounts go to? It will actually be seized by the Roman state, who is being headed up by Octavian and Mark Antony right now, right? It's the best fundraiser ever. Like, Octavian and Mark Antony ended up making a wild amount of money off of it. And then in this process, Octavian, as we know, is Caesar's grandnephew, formed this thing known as the Second Triumvirate, right? So the first triumvirate was Julius Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey, right? And since that thing fell apart and then put Caesar in power and then Caesar ends up dead, Octavian creates the third triumvirate, or excuse me, the second triumvirate. No, the third triumvirate is me, Mr. Mathern, and Mr. Waterson. Just a heads up. Octavian, though, creates the second triumvirate, which includes an alliance through a three-way dictatorship, right? So what they did is these guys got together and they were like, look, to bring Rome back to peace, like, I will rule this section of Rome, Mark Antony will rule this section, and then we'll give another section to this guy named Marcus Lepidus, who is, like, invalid and not that important, right? Marcus Lepidus, like, has some boats, and, like, he did some stuff, and, like, he went off and fought Sixtus Pompey, Pompey's son, and stuff like that. But, like, Marcus Lepidus is just like, so Marcus Lepidus got, like, North Africa and Carthage is just a bunch of rocks and stuff that nobody wants, right? So, basically, it was Octavian, Mark Antony, and Marcus Lepidus. Now, anyway, so the second triumvirate, though, takes over as a three-way dictatorship. And what they decide to do to earn the trust of the Roman people, as well as to assert themselves as the new ruling party of Rome, Octavian and his new buddies decide that they're going to go out, they're going to capture and find Brutus and Cassius and defeat them in open combat, right? So Octavian and Mark Antony march their armies out with Marcus Lepidus to go destroy Brutus and Cassius, the two guys that conspired and killed Julius Caesar, right? And what ends up happening after a lot of crazy stuff, they end up winning, right? And at the Battle of Philippi, it was actually a major moment. Brutus and Cassius both end up killing themselves, and then actually Octavian ends up winning, even though ironically enough he wasn't there, but it's one battle and blah, 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 blah. But in the process, Octavian has a bunch of people like sacrificed and then also like holds Caesar up as like a god, right? Because crazy thing happened is after they won, they had all these people that they had arrested. Like remember that hit list I was talking about? They had them all in prison. And after after Octavian and Mark Antony and Lepidus captured all of those like senatorial families at a big session of games inside of the Circus Maximus, they decided to have all of them executed in front of everybody and call them human sacrifices, right? And then apparently Octavian stood up in front of everyone in the middle of this games and said, "And now my father will ascend to the heavens as a god himself." And Octavian was so smart that everybody looked up into the sky, and he had been charting the stars, and he knew what was going to happen. And a comet streaked across the sky, and he pointed at it, and he says, "And there goes Julius Caesar on its way to heaven." And the people were like, "Oh my God." Octavian, very smart guy, right? So now, in this whole process, though, what ends up happening is following Brutus and Cassius' death and following the death of all those senatorial families, the second triumvirate ended up splitting up the empire so they could each rule a third of it, right? Mark Antony would get a section, Lepidus would get a section, and Augustus would get a section. Augustus got like Rome and Northern Europe. Mark Antony got this little stuff over here to the right, and then Lepidus got this stuff right here down in the bottom, which was like close to Northern Africa, right? So in this whole issue, though, what ends up happening is Lepidus got all of his land and his armies taken away from him by Octavian. Octavian looked over at Lepidus and felt that he wasn't of use to him anymore. And he was like, "I feel like there's a chance that you might end up allying with Mark Antony to come and take me over." So Octavian got a little paranoid, right? And he strips the land and the armies away from Marcus Lepidus. So now Octavian rules over Europe and Northern Africa. And Mark Antony only has this section over here to the right. Well, a crazy thing had ended up happening. Mark Antony's wife rebelled against Augustus, and he had her killed and stuff like that. But Mark Antony went out and got himself a new wife, right? Mark Antony actually ended up breaking out after his wife's death, and he married Cleopatra. He actually married Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt, and had 3 kids with her. And a war broke out between Octavian, Mark Antony, and Cleopatra, right? And the reason why this whole thing happened, though, is due to the fact that basically Octavian felt threatened that Mark Antony and Cleopatra may raise an army with other Greeks and barbarians and other people and try to invade Rome. Well, what ends up going down at the Battle of Elaea is actually eventually Octavian beats them, claims Egypt as his own. Mark Antony and Cleopatra end up dead, right? Mark Antony killed himself by having his soldiers, by stabbing himself with one of his soldiers' blades. Cleopatra ends up killing herself by picking a snake up out of a basket. She's like, I can't live without Mark Antony, and shoves it onto her chest and forces the cobra to bite her, and that's how she ends up dying, right? Eventually, Octavian, though, beats both Mark Antony and Cleopatra in open combat and claims Egypt as his own, right? So basically what he has done is Octavian has put himself in a position to be the ruler of the entire Mediterranean Sea, right? And what he's becoming is the very first emperor of Rome. So Octavian became dictator in 27 BC, and he did something really goofy, and he restored this thing known as the Republic. But why do I have the word Republic in quotes? Because it's not going to really be the Republic. It's going to be Octavian's version of it. And the first thing he does when he comes to power is he has his name changed. And he changes his name from Octavian to Augustus, which means respected one. But we're actually going to pick up right here whenever you get back into class. We'll talk about some more stuff then. I'll see you guys later.